a couple of different genetic traits. I'm going to talk about curly hair, red-green colorblindness, and baldness. There are some other really interesting traits that people put up on the discussion boards, and if you all want to talk about those, do projects on them, or just have me look into them for you, we can. So just let me know as we start rolling into chapter 16, especially when we start thinking about how human bodies are built. So let's start out with curly hair. So I want to look at this one first here, and this is looking at curly hair in European populations. And this is driven by a mutation in a gene called TCHH. So what we can see here is we have the ancestral allele in yellow, and you can see that most of the world has mostly the ancestral allele. This derived allele, the T, this only arises in European populations, and even in those, it's present to not 100%. So that means that not 100% of the population actually has straight hair. So the farther north we go, we sort of see more people with these straight hair alleles, but the farther east we go, we start to lose these straight hair alleles again. So this is one of the genes that we know has alleles involved in the straight curly hair decision, and it's also, I haven't really talked to you too much about this, but this is one other thing I need to bring up, which is that we know that human populations arose in Africa first. They migrated around Africa, and then they migrated up through the Middle East, into Europe, into West Asia, and then around up into East Asia. From East Asia, migrated down through Oceania, and then migrated over the Bering Strait to the Americas. Okay, so those are our patterns of migration. So what we're seeing here are populations that probably mostly stayed in Europe, with some back and forth between the other populations that were nearby. So I want to look at one other way that we get curly hair, but before I do that, I want to show you how we get curly hair in the first place. So let me get to a different pen color. So we get curly hair because of the shape of the hair follicle. So in people with straight hair, they have a straight hair follicle shape. So here's going to be the hair shaft itself, which is not made of living cells. It's the hair follicle cells. So the cells in this hair follicle here, these are actually alive, and these are what are going to give this hair all of its hair. So they're going to make the actual hair itself. And people with curly hair, they have a bent shaft, so a bent hair follicle. Sorry, not a bent shaft, a bent hair follicle. And that gives them wavy hair. So basically, as the hair is being built, it gets built wavy. Okay, so this is, or curly, I suppose. So this is curly hair. So one way to go from this ancestral form, which is, what all humans kind of started out with, this wavy hair, to this derived form, is to have this mutation in the TCHH gene. And there's another major way that humans do this, and that is, with a mutation in a gene called EDAR. And this is for ectodysplacin receptor. R, I guess. So ectodysplacin receptor mutations arise in East Asian populations, where we also know that we see this straight hair. So we see straight hair in Northern European populations, and it's extremely prevalent in East Asian populations, right? So if you go to Northern Europe and look at people whose families have been there for generations, some of them are going to have wavy hair, some of them are going to have curly hair, and some of them are going to have straight hair. But if you go to East Asia, you're going to see that most people have either straight or wavy hair. So this is much more prevalent in the population than the TCHH gene is in European populations. And that's because this is actually associated with some other things going on. So EDAR gives coarse hair. And when we're thinking about hair, we want to think about kind of two big things. Well, three, because hair color, of course, but also two other big things, which is the straightness or curliness of the hair, and then the coarseness or fineness of the hair. So if you happen to have hair, it might be fun, and you also happen to have people whose hair you can touch, which I know is kind of a hard thing to do in these pandemic times. But if there are people whose hair you can touch, it might be fun to try to touch people's hair who come from different kind of backgrounds, whose ancestors came from different parts of the world, and see if there are any substantial differences. So, for example, I'm of European plus American descent, but my spouse is from European descent, and we both have straight hair. But I got my straight hair this way, most likely, and he got his straight hair from the TCHH mutation. His hair is very fine, so I can run my fingers through it, and it's like, kind of like flops around a little bit. But my hair is very coarse. It like holds its shape, so it likes to stick out straight from my head a lot of the time. If I cut it down to like an inch, it will just stick straight out of my head like a chia pet. So, and that's because my hair is very coarse, okay? And so I don't have the European style straight hair. I have the East Asian style straight hair. Although my hair does have kind of a bit of a wave to it, which is not unusual in coarse hair populations. All right, so that is the EDAR. So it gives coarse hair, but it does one other thing too. Maybe two other things too, but I'm just going to talk about one of them right now, and we can talk about the other one later if we like. So it, this time when I always spell wrong, sweat glands. I always want to say sweet glands. Maybe that spells sweet glands. I couldn't tell you right now. I'm a little tired. So it gives you more sweat glands. So an increase in sweat glands is really good as you move to hotter, more humid climates where you start getting like too hot. So this increase in sweat glands can be really, really useful and super adaptive. So this is the other thing that this allele does. This allele of EDAR is it gives you an increased number of sweat glands. All right, so that is our curly hair versus straight hair. And so we know that curly hair versus straight hair is really heritable. We know a couple of the genes associated with it, but we also know that things like hair texture and hair curliness are complex genetic traits. There are a lot of things that influence them. So these are just two of the things that influence them. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is going to be red-green colorblind. Actually, let's talk about another hair thing. Let's talk about baldness. I changed my mind. And we have, there are lots of different forms of baldness. The one that I'm not going to talk too much about is female baldness. And the reason why I'm not going to talk about this isn't because it's not super interesting, which it is, but it is actually too complex. It's really complicated. So we already know of like tons and tons of genes that are associated with female baldness. So alleles of those genes give you thinner hair. Female baldness tends to start with hair thinning and then can lead to bald patches. But then besides that, a lot of females have hair growth patterns that give them small bald patches on occasion. So for example, people with my sort of jagged style of hairline, which is like not an uncommon style, maybe you all can look at your hairline and see if you have that too. We tend to have hair loss and growth patterns where we get a lot of a fast turnover around our hairline near our face. And so that means that for some parts of the year, we can end up with these sort of little bald patches like near the front of our face where our hair is like very thin. My mom and sister always freak out when it happens. And I'm like, y'all, this happens like every 2 years. We get these like little patches here. It will grow back, I promise. So female baldness can be cyclic. And it can just be plain hair thinning. It can also be associated with lots of different pathogenic genetic changes. So there are a lot of different disorders that can also have a side effect of having thinning hair or baldness in females. So this one's just too complicated. So instead I want to look at the really uncomplicated one, which is a little complicated in its own right, but we have a lot better understanding of this one because it follows a much simpler pattern. And that is male pattern baldness. And there's another name for male pattern baldness, and that's androgenic alopecia. So androgenic, that means having to do with androgens, that's testosterone. Alopecia, Alopecia just means baldness. So any kind of baldness gets like a fancy kind of name of alopecia. All right, so this androgenic alopecia has this really nice, oops, oh, I touched the keyboard. That's exciting. Has this really nice pattern that it follows. Okay, so we'll start out with, here's its nose. Oh, this is some poor guy. All right, so here's sort of like the, hair before the end of puberty, I suppose. Okay, and then you start to see hair loss. I'm making his head so long and thin. Then you start to see hair loss in this, they call it like an M pattern, okay, like this. So you start to lose it from the temples, okay. And a lot of people think that this is like a very handsome hair pattern when you have a little bit of loss from the sort of the sides like that. Okay, I'm going to make his head like less insane this time. There we go, nice round head, just how we like it. And then this will often be followed by hair thinning and loss from the crown. Okay. Oop, made that too close there. That's okay. Have a little stray hair, no big deal. Forgot to put in his hair gel this morning. All right. So this will often, we start to lose it from the front of the head and end up getting this horseshoe pattern. Okay, like this. Okay. So this is a really common balding pattern in males. And we actually have a lot of clues about what causes it. And what actually causes it is a allele of another EDAR gene, and this one's called ED2R, for ectrodysplacin 2 receptor. So it just is a different ectrodysplacin gene that this is a receptor for. So what this gene does when it has the, this mutant version of it, is it makes the hair follicle, so here's my hair follicle, here's the hair growing in the middle of it, it makes the hair follicle receptors for EDA2, it makes them more sensitive to a testosterone derivative called DHT, okay? So this hair follicle becomes sensitive to DHT. So what's DHT? Well, normally, testes produce testosterone, and there's this alpha dehydrogenase that converts testosterone into DHT. And if you're interested in finding out more about DHT and all of like the crazy effects it has on people's bodies, so including mutations in this conversion step, where the DHT doesn't get made, and so males end up having internal testes that don't come out until they go through puberty. And so in the past, people have thought that they were girls, and then just because they didn't have any obvious penis or testes, and then they undergo puberty, and like all of a sudden they have testes. If you want to find out more about this, we can definitely talk about it when we talk about reproductive system. I personally find it extremely interesting. So I'm going to take out that little X for now. So we've got this testosterone converted into a more powerful version called DHT. I'm going to denote that it's like super powerful by giving it like these little power marks. So here's our DHT, powerful testosterone. It's like testosterone on testosterone. So the hair follicle becomes sensitive to this. And when this, there's enough of this around, it actually makes the hair follicle start to die. So the hair follicle gets very weak. And so instead of like a nice big thick hair, it starts to make like little sad hairs that fall out really easily until the hair follicle just stops making hair altogether. And so you can see why males are going to be more susceptible to this. And that's because they make more of this DHT. So the more DHT you make, the more potential you have to kill off these hair follicles. So this typically isn't going to have a really huge effect in females because they just don't make enough testosterone. Just like kind of this interesting, according to me, side note is that if you start taking testosterone, so if you're XX and you don't have any testes, so you don't make a lot of testosterone, and you start taking testosterone supplementally, like through the little patches or through shots or whatever, you can actually sort of uncover whether you have these alleles because you could start going bald, which is like kind of surprising to people who start on testosterone, that they start to lose their hair. Or I guess it's not super surprising, but I'm sure it feels like very different from having a full head of hair. All right. So there's another reason though why males are more susceptible to this, and that's because EDA2R is X-linked. It's on the X chromosome. All right, so why are X-linked genes? Why do they have a bigger effect in males than in females? Meaning that more males will exhibit a phenotype that's associated with a mutation in an X-linked gene. Well, to explain that, we can look at our last story, which is colorblindness. So colorblindness. So colorblindness, I'm going to start out with the gene. Since I study eye evolution and vision evolution, I'm of course interested in the gene. And there are 3 genes that are mostly implicated in colorblindness. But 2 of these are the ones that are involved in the most common form of colorblindness, which is red-green colorblindness. So red-green colorblindness is the most common type. And there are 2 genes that are going to have alleles that give you red-green colorblindness. And so both of these are opsins, and one of them, I'm just going to color code this for us. So one of them is an opsin that is sensitive to the color green. So this opsin, it's a protein that changes shape when it's touched by green light. And that's just the protein. So basically, if anything green hits your eyeball, so these are both found in your eyeballs. If anything green hits your eyeball, so here's your eyeball. If anything green hits it, it's going to trigger the opsin protein that's made by this gene. So this gene here makes the opsin protein. The protein gets popped into your eyeballs, into your retina, and then if green light hits it, this opsin is going to change shape. So the other, oh my gosh, what have I done? Sorry, hold on. All right, here we go. Let's try this again. Sorry about that. I'm always messing my technology up somehow. All right, I touched the wrong one. I touched new note instead of my pen color, which is what I meant to touch. So the other kind of red-green color blindness is from having a mutation in the red opsin. So this one changes shape when it's hit by red light. So same deal. So it's this gene encodes a protein that gets put on your retina. When red light hits it, it gets activated, so it changes its shape. So that lets your body know that there's something red around. All right, so if you have a mutation in either of these, you're not able to distinguish the color red from the color green. Green, I'm trying to say blue at the same time. Can't distinguish red from green, but you can still distinguish either of them from blue. So things that have a lot of blue in them, you can tell apart from other things with less blue in them. So that's kind of a little bit of a weird one. So if you have only one of these working too, you get a ping when you see green and a different ping when you see blue, but you get no specific ping for red. You just see like generic gray. But that you can still, since you can still distinguish blue from either green or red based on the one of these 2 opsins that's working, you still see the color blue just fine. So one other thing that's interesting about these to me is that they're both on the X chromosome, so they're next door to each other. This is the X chromosome. And these are next door to each other on the X chromosome, and that's because they came about from an ancient duplication. So like, back when we were still like, our ancestors were still living in the forest, in the jungles, they only had one of these 2 opsins. They couldn't tell red apart from green very well. And then at some point there was a duplication on the genome. So there's an error in DNA replication that basically duplicated a big chunk of it. And that included the opsin gene. And so that's how we have 2 opsin genes next door to each other on the X chromosome. It's from a DNA replication error back when we were apes, which is kind of cool. I guess we're still apes if you really want to think about it. Anyways, colorblindness. So it's on the X chromosome, and that means that males are more susceptible to it. So that's because males only need to have 1 mutation in order to have colorblindness, whereas females need to have 2 mutations. So let's look at 2 different crosses. So let's take a colorblind carrier mom with a wild type dad, and let's Punnett square them out to see what kind of progeny they'll produce. Okay, so we'll put the mom's alleles on this side and the dad's alleles on this side. So we get an X star X and an XX, an X star Y, and an XY. So I'm going to circle the people who will exhibit color blindness, and it's just this guy over here. So this daughter is a carrier, but doesn't actually have color blindness because this is a recessive disorder. She's wild type and he's wild type. So half of the sons will be colorblind and none of the daughters. Okay, let's look at another cross for this. So in this case, let's have another carrier for color blindness with an actual colorblind dad. And we'll make another Punnett square for these guys. And let's just see how this segregates out. So we'll put mom's alleles here. Oh, that's a very nice X, sorry. Okay, mom's alleles on this side and dad's alleles on this side. So here we're going to finally get a colorblind daughter, and then a carrier daughter, and a colorblind son, and a wild type son. So even if we sort of predispose our cross for these colorblind daughters, we still are only getting the same proportion of colorblind daughters out as colorblind sons out. So we really can't like push this in the female direction in any way. So on the whole, in a population, we're going to see many more colorblind males because they only have this one X chromosome. We call them hemizygous. So for any allelic variants that they have on the X chromosome, we say that those alleles are hemizygous, not homozygous, not heterozygous, but hemizygous. All right, and that is red-green color blindness and why it's more prevalent in males.